Happy Saturday. It's March 29th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And it is a big week here at Airmail for many reasons. But first and foremost, we have the publication of our editor, Graydon Carter's book. We will get to that in just a minute. But first, we have the news break. Okay, so the big story in the U.S. this week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sent out details of a planned attack against rebels in Yemen to a group of senior officials in the government. This was done over the encrypted chat app Signal. But unfortunately, he also inadvertently included Jeffrey Goldberg to this conversation. He would be the editor of The Atlantic. So guess which news outlet broke that story? Meanwhile, 10,000 employees are expected to be dismissed from the Department of Health and Human Services, which is overseen by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. No, this is not The Onion. This is Airmail. But as always, we are here to give you a break from all of this inanity.
Exactly. And first, for years, Danny Elfman was one of the most sought-after composers in Hollywood, writing scores for movies such as Beetlejuice. But now, his reputation is in tatters as he faces accusations of sexual harassment. Jacob Bernstein has written an in-depth story about Elfman this week, and he's going to join us to discuss the story that has riveted and perplexed Hollywood. Then, as Ashley noted, and you may have heard, the founder of Airmail and our co-editor, Graydon Carter, has written his long-awaited memoir entitled When the Going Was Good, An Editor's Adventures During the Last Golden Age of Magazines. And we're excited to have him join us today to talk about his book, The Enduring Magic of New York, and more. You do not want to miss this. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
There is no question. Let's get Graydon on here. We're used to having him on Morning Meeting to talk about politics, the news, Trump, unfortunately. But now we are going to discuss When the Going Was Good, an editor's adventures during the last golden age of magazines. We are very happy to welcome not only the editor of Airmail, but also one of the world's most famous Canadians. Welcome, Graydon.
I'll take that a bit of flattery, and thank you.
It's like the stars aligned, right? Like as Canada is at the center of conversation, your book comes out. It's an international sensation, covered in every newspaper across the land.
People like Marty Short and Lorne Michaels are way up the Canadian food chain from me. I'm way further down than they are.
I'd like to see the list of the Canadian food chain.
Okay, well, besides being Canadian.
It's Marty and Lorne, Catherine O'Hara. It used to be like Robbie Robertson. And Mark Carney's up there.
And is Tim Hortons at the top of it?
But Tim Horton was always at the top of it, especially back when he played hockey.
I mean, Graydon, as I was reading the book, I couldn't help but think that we really need Spy Magazine or Airmail to be doing an index of this book because the personalities and characters are such a big part of it. I mean, I'd love to know a little about the process of how you put all these great stories together and, how you dealt with the ones that ended up on the cutting room floor, so to speak.
It was funny. I'd never thought of doing a memoir. And then I was having lunch with James Fox in London about 7 years ago. I think I'm still at Vanity Fair. And he said, if you ever do a memoir, I'd love to help you with it. And without James, I don't think I would have embarked on this because James is great at telling me what was boring and what wasn't, what to leave in, what not to, and it also helped how to organize it rather than just have it go in a sort of linear fashion. I was born in Toronto General Hospital and that sort of thing, and then continue on from there. So he was very important. As for the index, I think index is sort of data book in a strange way. And I thought, I'm not going to make it easy for people. They're going to have to read the book to find their names in it.
I mean, one of your characteristics that comes through so strongly is your fearlessness. And that's been a through line in your entire career, beginning from your earliest days at Time Magazine. I mean, how responsible do you think that impulse has been for all of your success?
Well, first of all, let's walk that back a bit. I don't think I'm fearless at all. It's probably more foolhardiness than fearlessness in many instances. But I do think that if you're in journalism, that a little bit of overcoming fear of what you're going to write about is an important factor, especially when it comes to the big seats of power, like in the White House.
What did it feel like to be in that sort of headspace of writing this book and looking back at your career over the amount of time that it took you to do that?
Well, I do love the past. I love the last 50 years of the last century. I love the both black and whiteness of it and the Kodachromeness of it. And, the world was largely at peace, with the exception if you were in America during Vietnam. But Canada certainly was at peace. And at the same time, I don't think you can live in the past. I think you just have to have a sort of great respect for the past. And I think that was a big part of Vanity Fair, just a respect for those last 50 years of the last century. And also, by learning about those years, you sort of can explain how we got to where we are now.
Do you find that the role of the editor is more important than ever in a way, or am I just saying that because that's what we do for a living?
The public doesn't know what they want before it arrives. I mean, nobody knew they wanted a TV show about a wealthy media family before Succession, and yet that was sort of the great hit of the last 10 years. There's a series out called Adolescence now, which everybody I know has seen. But nobody knew they needed that show beforehand. Nobody knew they needed a smartphone before Steve Jobs put one out. So I think editors are vital in that the job is to sort of examine what's out there within your frame of interest and reference and choose the most compelling aspects for the reader. You're sort of you're a forager. In the same way a chef at a restaurant goes to the market and brings in all the ingredients he needs to make a pasta primavera, let's say, and puts it on your table, and you don't have to do it. But you can also do it at home if you want. If you want to spend hours on the internet, you can do this yourself. But the fact is, editors do it for you.
Graydon, one of the things I love about the book comes at the very end. And it's, I guess, in some ways, from the first time I met you, it's when I started as a young person at Spy. It's your rules for living. It's a wonderful surprise because you get to the end of the book and it's kind of like, oh, it keeps going. And not only that, but can you tell the audience about what the thinking is behind the rules for living and a few of your favorites?
In the road of life, I sort of picked up a number of things that worked for me that helped me sort of get through a day. Often they came from people wiser than me, and they helped me make not too much of a fool of myself, or at least not more of a fool of myself than I already did. And some of them can be applied to almost anybody, and some can be applied to people in specific industries. A friend of mine, John Doran in Canada, taught me, and he said, when you're in a situation and pull yourself up from the plane of where you are and take a look down and look at yourself objectively and think about, are you in this situation, whatever it's obviously between you and another person or other people, are you the hero in the story or the villain or somewhere in between? And in most cases, try to be the person you'd root for if you saw them in the movie in the situation. And I think that's a valuable bit of advice.
And it reminds me, one bit of advice that you gave me that's not on the rules for living, but I still use it as for myself is, I just got into Spy. You took me to lunch at Odeon. I was from the hustings, and you're like, are you a regular somewhere? I said, I've just moved to the city. He said, got to be a regular. Mike, you got to be a regular. Pick a restaurant, become a regular, because you know what? One day you're going to meet a Lufthansa stewardess somewhere, and you're going to be able to walk into a restaurant, and it's going to be full, and they're going to give you a table. So become a regular. It's served me well, so I add that is...
Yeah, no, look, you're a regular in our block at Gene.
That's why Jeans is still in business, Graydon. We have you to thank for that.
Two old spy hands, you and Amy Bell.
I tell people all the time, you gave us a lot of rules for life, and some of it was professional, some of it was personal, but it all endures.
There you go. And yeah, minus the Lufthansa stewardess.
Well, it was a long time ago.
I don't think your beautiful wife, Brooke, was a stewardess.
Okay, gentlemen, while you're on the topic of Spy, I'm sorry to say, Graydon, we have to bring up Donald Trump. We won't get into it in depth because, frankly, there's so much deliciousness in the book that we don't want to spoil it for our listeners. But you have been famously at various degrees of odds with Donald Trump for 40 years. And do you have any advice for Americans now to live in the Trump era?
Well, first of all, keep your passport up to date, I would think. And the problem is I don't have advice. And because I don't actually recognize this man at all. I think he's going to, wrestling matches and NASCAR races and that sort of thing. There's a sort of cabal operating in the West Wing that are doing most of this. I think Trump sort of goes along with it, but I don't see him as being this person. I know he could be vindictive, but not on levels we're seeing right now. And I don't think he gets that far into the weeds on American policy this way. The tariff thing may be a thing that he was obsessed with years ago, and I think he sort of announced it without ever seeing what the ramifications of this would be, and they're not great for both America and for our neighbors. And, let's face it, if you live in London, Ashley, I mean, Americans used to be, both feared and somewhat loved, but now they're just feared and somewhat suspected of being not the person, not the country they could rely on. And I think it's an issue. Yeah, we're not the most popular country in the world right now, especially with our closest neighbors and allies.
I mean, you've always been such a believer in the American experiment, and you've always used your journalism to explain and interpret that in such powerful ways. But I mean, a lot of people are now questioning, are we going to be able to survive this? What do you think?
Well, I think the coup has already taken place. And people complain about the Democrats, but this has come to such a shock to the system for them. I think it's going to take them a good 6 months to find their footing. I think they need a whole new layer of leadership. I was surprised to learn that Chuck Schumer, who I always thought was in his mid-80s, is younger than I am. But I've always thought of him as ancient. And the thing is, Trump is 4 years older than Schumer. He plays young. Schumer, even 30 years ago, plays old. And I think that the Democrats have to look younger, more vibrant, and actually get out there and tell people that they're going to help them in the ways that the Republicans are not. And it's an easy sell. If you're a veteran, if you're a farmer, if you have a 401k, if you have a child with learning disabilities, if you're at a university, none of this is going towards helping you in any stretch of the imagination. And the Democrats, I think, are going to be, have to be very good at getting that across to people. And you're already starting to see, pushback in Republican districts when they have their town hall meetings, when they do have them.
Graydon, the title of your book is When the Going Was Good. And we've talked about this, among us staff at Airmail. But for those of us at Airmail, the going is still really good. We are really fortunate to get to do this work. And something that you told me, I remember when I started at Airmail was, you might not make as much money as an investment banker when you go into this field, but you're going to have a lot of fun and lead a very interesting life. And that is so true for us. And, I think that's especially true for you. You had such an incredible run at Vanity Fair. And in many ways, this book is a celebration of that. But then you came out with this other new, amazingly fresh idea. We now, not to toot our own horn, but, we have 500,000 subscribers all over the world. That's pretty impressive in a short amount of time. I mean, what keeps pushing you and driving you forward to do all of these new things, whether it's a book, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the films that you produce, whether it's your restaurants?
Well, I don't know. I mean, life is not a dress rehearsal. It's the just as once. And I have a little bit more time on my hands because 4 of my kids are grown and out of the house. It got me into the documentary film business. It got me into producing a Broadway play. It got me into the restaurant business. In fact, it got me into the magazine business of just, an opportunity presents itself. If it looks interesting, go, what the hell? And so I didn't think of writing a memoir. The Airmail was a separate thing because it's something I'd thought of years before, even before the internet. I thought, okay, I don't play golf. I'm not going to sit around and retire, like move to Florida and become a Republican or anything like that. And I wanted something that I could produce from Europe, where I was living then. And it sort of worked out.
We're having a good time.
I love having an office family. We had an office family at Spy. We had one at Vanity Fair. We have one at Airmail, and it's a great collection of sort of older people like my age and then the smart young tyros like you guys. Well, you're in between. You're in betweeners.
We'll take it. It is the most fun thing in the world. And that's, I think, among the many great things about your book. I mean, it brings to life this business, and this pastime and this vocation that we all love so deeply. And I think it's a real celebration in many ways of not only journalism, but the journalist's life, right?
Yeah. I mean, the magazine world, and even I would extend that to Airmail, it's a fun world, and I think you should. People historically had enjoyable times at offices. Often where they met their mates. It's where they made best friends. It's how they afforded having children in apartments and houses. And I just think, why not make that section of your life, which is about 8 to 9 hours a day, enjoyable? And you should try to do it in a place that is convivial and as enjoyable as humanly possible.
I just want to touch on what you'd said earlier about, for those of us who know you and have spent so much time with you, you're exactly right. How much you do love mid-century America and those last 50 years and how much we all learn from. That's the foundation of everything in the culture that we love. And I think that's what resonates for me with your writing in the book and how you've captured it. It's sort of, it's not just about the magazine business. It's about New York City in the 70s and 80s and up till now, and watching you journey through it as that central character and telling us why we all should love it so much and how much it's inspired you. So it's a beautiful portrait of a world as well.
Well, you experienced a great deal that you were at Spy, and then you spent a good part of your career at Condé Nast. So we were just lucky just to happen to be there at the right place at the right time. And to work with Cy Newhouse was one of God's great gifts. I can't think of a head of a company who was a better champion of the things they made. I mean, Cy loved magazines. He loved the feel of them. He loved the look of them. He loved the influence of them. But he was not in any way a braggart or a show-off. He was the most mild-mannered of people with that much power as you'll find anywhere on earth.
Okay, well, Graydon, you're probably tired of talking about this book. Michael and I could keep you here all night. I think you've got a lunch appointment, something's going on, but we want to thank you not only for speaking with us about it, but for writing this marvelous book that frankly was such a pleasure just to live in your universe, for however long it took to read it. And I think it's one of these books people are going to come back to again and again.
Elaine, look, the journey continues and we're all together on that journey.
Thank you so much.
Oh, such a pleasure.
Michael, I feel like we should have like a debriefing in which, we answer the questions that everybody really wants to know, which is, what is it like to work with Graydon? Is he as much fun as he seems? And I think the answer to that is 100%.
Exactly. We had this wonderful party hosted the other night by former Mayor Mike Bloomberg downtown to celebrate the publication of the book. And it was filled with, all the layers of people who've worked with him across the year, from Spy to Time Magazine to The Observer to Vanity Fair, of course, and Airmail. And you just see all the lives he's touched and careers he's mentored. So it's a testament to how he conducts his life. And it was wonderful to see it and see everyone toast him. So you're exactly right.
Well, Graydon, we're going to be raising a glass to you in London very soon. Just get ready. Anyway, but moving on, let's get to the journalism that we know and love. Michael, I'm sorry to follow this up with a Me Too story, but such is the news.
Such is the news.
All right, let's get Jacob Bernstein on here to talk about the incredibly intriguing tale of Danny Elfman. Jacob is a reporter at the style section of the New York Times. Welcome, Jacob.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
So, Jacob, many of us know Danny Elfman as the name who shows up in the credits of some of our favorite Tim Burton films, among others. But his personality is completely fascinating. And let's talk a little bit about who he was, where he came of age, and how he built this career in Hollywood.
Right. So Danny Elfman is really one of the three most kind of famous composers in Hollywood. That's a different kind of fame, of course, than being a movie star. But there really are, if you were an A-list director in Hollywood, in all likelihood, your movie was going to be scored by either John Williams, if it was a kind of more conventional movie, and it was going to be Hans Zimmer if it was a maybe less conventional movie. And then kind of really weirder, cooler movies, but big ones were Danny Elfman. And that was sort of his turf. He had been in a theater troupe called the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, which then became a kind of 80s rock band-ish thing called Oingo Boingo that did not have a gigantic national footprint, and yet they could have filled the Hollywood Bowl. And among people who really loved them, they were this kind of cult thing. And so after starting in the mid 80s, he begins to do scoring. He does Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and then he winds up doing the score for The Simpsons. From there goes on to work on a slew of other kind of big Hollywood movies, including the Spider-Man franchise, and he gets nominated for 4 Academy Awards.
I mean, he's such an intriguing character too, visually, right? I mean, he's married to Bridget Fonda. Tell us a little bit about what we know about his personal life.
Yes, this is another thing. He's not just this big composer. He marries Bridget Fonda, who had a big career and then kind of leaves the business in a sort of surprising way after doing Single White Female and Jackie Brown. I mean, the other thing is that Danny Elfman, sort of who he is, he sort of looks like almost what you would imagine listening to those scores. He's got this kind of bright orange hair. He has black and gray tattoos all over his body. He's in his early 70s, but he's sort of unusually fit with there's a kind of punk rock LA thing going on that's kind of a little bit Dr. Seuss at the same time.
Yeah, he kind of looks like a character in a Tim Burton film.
Totally. He looks like a character in a Tim Burton film. And one could wonder in a certain way if that doesn't make him a target in a certain way as well.
Well, I think he is a bit of a superstar, right, in Hollywood in a way that many composers are not. Not only because visually he's memorable, but because he's received all of these accolades. And as a result, he has quite a bit of a fan base, right, of his own?
Yes. He does these annual shows at the Hollywood Bowl. There's really no other film composer who could fill up a venue of that size. And Danny Elfman can do it. He plays his scores. people dress up like they were in Beetlejuice or in The Nightmare Before Christmas or any of those Tim Burton movies. And it's a kind of kooky Hollywood show. And one of the funny things about a kind of guy who's sort of a punk rock character is that if you scratch the surface with guys who are punks, there's also something a little nerdy about them, that there's something kind of not square exactly, but definitely childlike and sort of naive.
Well, the woman at the heart of our story is named Nomi Abadi, and she began as a fan of Elfman's, right? I mean, she contacted him on Facebook or was it on social media? Tell us how that all happened.
In 2015, so he meets this person who is in her late 20s. Her name is Nomi Abadi. She is a piano prodigy. Like him, she is a kind of native of California, of Southern California. She flies to meet Elfman at this show that he's doing in Colorado. And they kind of hit it off. And they begin to exchange emails and texts. And they're talking about juice cleanses and life path numbers. So are they talking because she wants to be a composer, which she later says? Are they talking because they're having a flirtation? Are they talking because he's offered her a job? It could be any of those things. It could be all three. She later says kind of that there was this professional relationship that existed. There doesn't appear to be any evidence of that.
And you interviewed Danny Elfman as well as his wife, Bridget Fonda. So tell us a little bit about how Elfman characterized this relationship and what Fonda was aware of or wasn't aware of.
So Elfman and Fonda have this relationship where about 10 or 12 years ago, maybe 15, he starts to do these shows around the world where he's performing the scores of his movies along with old Oingo Boingo stuff. And Bridget doesn't really travel with him to do that stuff. And they don't have an open marriage in the literal sense, but he feels that he has a certain amount of space to, kind of go skinny dipping with women. And he goes to saunas with them. And guys who are on the road, it's this sort of weird life where there's a huge amount of attention built into it. And he gets it from a kind of group of women who are, some of whom kind of fly to the places where he's performing, whether it's the London Palladium or the Paris Rex, and meeting him there. And as Bridget later says, she sort of knew that he was a guy who would kind of fool around. And he says that didn't include actual sex. It certainly doesn't appear to have included actual sex with Nomi Abadi. Neither Elfman nor Abadi claims that they had sex, but stuff clearly goes on between them. And there's this naked photo shoot that they wind up taking when she comes to see him in Paris. And that sort of forms the first part of what later becomes a sexual harassment claim.
Yeah. So at what point does Abadi begin to classify this relationship as non-consensual in some capacity?
She comes to Paris and he flies her there, or she books the flight and he pays for it. And they have dinner. She goes to his show. They take a sauna together and wind up taking these naked pictures together. The naked pictures are also, he has had this kind of photo project where he photographs his sort of decaying body. It's all very kind of Tim Burton, not devoid of eroticism completely, but also not fully pornographic. I mean, according to him, they're not at all pornographic. But he tells her about this, and she's saying to him, "Oh, that's so great. I love nothing more than when I'm photographed by someone else." And he's like, "Well, that's what I feel about it." And then they have this sauna together, and she comes up to his room, and she later says that he initiated this photo session, and he says that she initiated the photo session. Her story also changes considerably over time. In the first complaint that she files against him in 2018, and this is, of course, 3 years later, she claims that he never touched her. And then later on, when the whole thing becomes public and she then sues him for defamation, she then says that he forced her to masturbate, which had not been claimed back in 2018. So there are these questions of why did the claim change, and was she traumatized? Or was she lying?
Well, Jacob, as part of your reporting, you reviewed some text messages, right, between her and one of her friends. Tell us about that relationship and what you learned.
So the text messages show that long after she comes back from Paris, of course, she is texting with this friend of hers named Rose Rubin. And Rose Rubin is the niece of Sam Raimi, who is the director of the Spider-Man franchise, and he's a big director in Hollywood. And Bridget Fonda and Danny Elfman actually met on a movie of his called The Simple Plan. And so Rose is his niece. And weirdly enough, Nomi has been teaching piano to his children. And so Rose becomes friends with Nomi. Nomi sends her these texts that are like, well, my shrink has been telling me not to have an affair with him. Ha ha. And she is texting her about how great the Paris trip is. And then she's texting her because Danny Elfman is having a Christmas party with Bridget Fonda and she gets invited. And she says, I'm going as a belly dancer. And she says, basically, because I want to dress as elaborately and sexy so that he drops everything in his life, decides to chase me instead. So she does not seem to be showing the signs either of a person who has worked for him or as a person who is in a kind of tricky spot with a person who is flirting with them and they don't want it.
How does Elfman eventually deal with these accusations?
So this is one of the things that makes the story very tricky. That in the end, what winds up happening is that Elfman settles with Nomi Abadi. And so there's this question, why does a man who thinks he's innocent settle? And doesn't that mean he's guilty? What he says that's pretty interesting is that if you actually look at how much money he was going to lose by not settling at that point in time, it was just a no-brainer. He had a single movie lined up in 2018 that paid more than $1 million. So he was going to lose 5 of those, basically. So he makes this calculation with his lawyers and he settles with her. She gets $500,000 for herself. And then her lawyers get paid about $150,000, which she pays. And she gets about $150,000 or close to that to give to charity. And then instead of giving the money to charity, what she seems to do is she starts her own. She starts this thing called the Female Composer Safety League. And she becomes a kind of presence in the Me Too movement in Los Angeles. And so she becomes involved in this network, even though she can't talk about what's happened with Danny Elfman because she's entered into a confidentiality agreement with Danny Elfman. That's what the money is for. So shortly after he pays it off, because it gets paid off in installments over the course of 5 years, suddenly he gets word that Rolling Stone is working on a piece about what has happened between them.
Did Elfman participate in the Rolling Stone piece? And if so, what was his reaction to these accusations?
Elfman really kind of hits the rails about it. He kind of says, this was a woman who wanted to steal me from my wife and retaliated. He says that kind of very clearly to them. And his team produces a kind of dossier for Rolling Stone that has all these old text messages, especially between her and her friend Rose Rubin, where she is talking about her relationship with Elfman and she is expressing a romantic interest in him, seemingly with a matter of kind of frequency. They provide all of this stuff to Rolling Stone, and there is radio silence afterward. Rolling Stone does not just publish the piece. And according to people that I've spoken with, the reason that they don't just publish the piece is because it gives them pause in a way that they're not used to getting with these Me Too stories. It's also complicated by the fact that unlike some of the earlier stories in the Me Too era, you're not dealing with a person who has numerous accusers. You're dealing with a person who has one accuser. And that, in a certain way, is a trickier thing for journalists to figure out because if you have multiple accusers, there's really not a whole lot to say once somebody reaches out for comment. There's this pattern of misconduct and these survivors whose stories fortify each other and build on each other. And one person can be lying who's a Harvey Weinstein accuser, but there are 90 something accusers. And the overwhelming majority of the stories are true. When you only have one accuser, you really are in this strange thing of he said, she said. And the facts don't actually line up neatly at all with what Nomi Abadi has alleged, despite this settlement that exists between them.
And how has the Rolling Stones story and the other press about Elfman impacted his career in Hollywood?
This is one of the things that's kind of interesting about Elfman is that he works in the music business, and the men in the music business have not always been quite as canceled by sexual misconduct allegations as guys in the film business, guys in other businesses. There may be a variety of reasons for that. One being that there's a kind of idea about quote unquote groupies sort of built into it. And there's a machismo that's built into what being a kind of rock god is supposed to be. But then there is also this thing of Me Too kind of hitting the music business later than it hits the movie business. And hitting with these stories where you have one accuser versus one person. And so Elfman is doing the Beetlejuice reboot, and they allow him to complete the score, but he's not allowed on the set. He's not invited to the premiere. There's a kind of like, the only reason that we're going to let you keep this gig is because you already had it. He continues to do these shows, though, at the Hollywood Bowl, and people continue to come. What does happen to him, without any question, so he's sort of half canceled. He exists in this kind of purgatory of a failed Me Too hit in some way, of a not wholly successful Me Too hit. It psychologically reorients him in a sort of remarkable way.
But I found some of the details in your piece kind of chilling. I mean, in one of Abadi's text messages, she says, quote, "I can destroy his entire life with what I know about that man. He is really fucking dumb to mess with me." I mean, that just really struck me. What I know about that man is how she's going to destroy his life, not what he did to me or, you know, what our relationship was like. I mean, what did you make of all of that as you were reporting it?
I mean, I think that you see from these text messages that her life has been reoriented by whatever has gone on with him, that it becomes this kind of singular obsession for her.
How has all of this impacted Elfman's, to use an overused phrase, mental health? I mean, it seems from your reporting like he and Fonda, who's incredibly press shy, I mean, we almost never see her, that they're so eager to tell their side of the story about this affair that they're willing to really put themselves out there in a way that, you know, is quite revealing.
Yeah, I don't know how eager Bridget was to do this. I went and met them, and there was some comfort that I think developed that enabled that. But certainly Danny, I think he needed to talk to the degree that he could about this, because he feels as if he has been like a man hunted. And I think probably a lot of guys who have been ensnared in Me Too things feel that. But with Elfman, you do have this sort of unique thing where it's really this dispute with this one person, and it keeps going. Feels to him, it's like his own baby reindeer episode.
You spent months and months looking at this story. I guess, how do you understand it? And in some ways, is it a guy who was just too trusting of someone, and there was consensual interactions? And is that somewhat accurate?
One of the things that I think is complicated about this story is that although you have a power dynamic between one very well-known composer and a person who is not yet well-known when he meets her, she's not his employee. She doesn't seem to be trying out for a job. She doesn't work for him. So what is going on? Is it a thing in which you have sexual harassment? Is it a flirtation that goes awry? Or is it, in fact, this kind of uniquely Los Angeles story involving two people who are in the same business at different points in their careers, and they're having this interchange where perhaps no one is actually saying what's going on, because she's maybe in her mind trying out for a job, maybe in his mind they're just hanging out, that you're working people while pretending that you're not working them. And that makes it difficult to know exactly what's what. And with performers, it's really different because it's a totally gig-based thing. It's built on relationships, as they say. It's a town of relationships. And so what is this thing that happened? And becomes like a fun house or something. At the heart of this, what you kind of have is a question. Is this a Me Too story? Is this a true crime story? And in some way, that's the trip of the whole thing. This relationship that develops and then combusts in sort of in sort of spectacular fashion. Is she a victim of sexual misconduct, or is she selling a story about herself that is not real? And it comes against the backdrop of what it's like to work in Hollywood, where the relationships that exist between people can be friends, colleagues, lovers, or any combination thereof.
Well, Jacob, it's such a fascinating story and really incredible reporting. Thank you so much for sharing it with us and for talking it through.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jacob.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Well, Michael, on that note, it is the weekend. It's a beautiful spring day here in London. I hope New York is equally compelling. But still, for those of us who just want to stay inside and immerse ourselves in culture, give us something.
I have a feeling you may have watched this already. Can we talk about adolescence?
I'm so glad that's what you want to talk about. Yes, please.
So for listeners out there who may not have heard of this, is a new limited drama on Netflix, which is setting viewing records around the world. It's basically the story of how a family's world in London, England, is turned upside down when their 13-year-old son is arrested on suspicion of murdering a schoolmate. It's unbelievable. It's written by two men, Jack Thorne and Stephen Graham. It's 4 parts. Where do you want to begin with it? And I guess we should say we're not going to give any spoilers here, but because it's just, you have to see it and experience it. But where do you want to begin with this?
This is a personal story for everyone who has a child, everyone who uses social media, everyone in the world, really. And I think it's powerful for a lot of reasons. One, I think the 4-part format is really effective. Each episode is shot in just one take. So it's really lingering on the emotions and the banalities of everyone involved. I could find very little fault with this show. I mean, it's haunting for a lot of reasons. I can't remember the last time I woke up at 5:45 in the morning and the first thing I did was turn on my television, but that's where I was when I wanted to see episode 3. I was talking with some friends about this who have children at the same school as one of my children, and I think this is going to change behavior. You know, I feel like we're at this watershed moment for smartphones and technology use among children between John Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, and now this show. There's really a rallying call to get kids off of these things. You know, there's just so little good, I think, to be done of engaging with social media in this way at this age. But what did you think?
This show was absolutely riveting. The performance by this young actor, Owen Cooper, is breathtaking. I mean, and if you really want to see something, you can look up his audition tape. It's already on Google. You can Google it. And Stephen Graham, who plays his father, and the whole family. As you said, this show, I think it's one of the few that I've seen where days and days and days later, you're still thinking about it, because I think it feels so real. And of course, as you say, it is so real with the issues it's dealing with. And you don't want to hear issues spoken about when you're talking about a show, but what it touches on and how it affects all of us. You know, my best friend is a adolescent psychologist in Chicago, Dr. John Duffy, and he's been telling me for years, and he's talked about this crisis, and he's told me about it. And we've been texting this week. He said, this is my life every day, dealing with boys like this. Anyway, it's called Adolescence. It's on Netflix, and I have to say, the intensity of the story, as well as this young boy's performance, will not only have you on the edge of your seat, it will take your breath away, and I'm sure leave you thinking about it long after it is finished.
Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation. I think this is just the beginning for this show. And, if you do need something feel good to listen to and enjoy, Michael, the new Haim single, Relationships, is an awful lot of fun. I also love the new Bon Iver album. Very good. You can also just read Graydon's book. Listen to it on audiobook, even better. It is his voice reading the whole thing. Well, on that note, we wish you all a wonderful weekend. Michael, go out there and have some fun in the sun. Will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. Our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We'll be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting, but in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.